Every murder town is unique. Every story, terrifying. Tonight we visit a town that is home to a tragic piece of criminal history.
Even in a small town like this, awful things happen.
A place where a killer lurked in plain sight.
He didn't give the impression of a nasty killer, if you like. He looked like a student, he acted like a student, but very quiet and reserved.
And where everyone was a suspect.
Always had the thought that, yes, I might be passing by, I might be holding a door open for him. That was a very disquieting thought, that he could be amongst us, close to us, at any time.
Bristol is tonight's murder town. Some killers attack complete strangers. Some target the vulnerable, the young, or the elderly. And some prey on people that they know. There are killers who are inspired by money or by revenge, by sexual deviancy, by hatred. There are opportunists and there are meticulous planners. But what unites these men and women is one simple trait. And it's the most terrifying thing of all. They live amongst us. In our towns, on our streets, in our houses. They're just like the rest of us, but capable of evil. And they could be anywhere. Welcome to Murdertown.
Do you feel it in the air? Oh. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. And something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes.
Tonight's episode tells a story that shaped how many future criminal investigations would run. We're in Bristol, in the southwest of England. It's home to about 500,000 people, and it's twice been voted the best city in England to live in, a safe place for children to grow up. One of those young residents in the early 1990s was Louise Smith.
She was quite small and quite fiery, but then she shot up, and she was quite tall by 1995, and had a lot of good qualities. Very loyal to her friends. She was very nice.
She had red hair, shoulder length. She loved musicals. Fred Astaire especially. She broke her heart when he died. She cried all afternoon.
Louise left school at 16 and got a job close to her family home in the town of Yate.
She was pretty sharp. She had quite a good job in an office with a local company, so she was doing quite well there, I think, and she enjoyed it.
In late December, Louise was excitedly getting ready for Christmas. She'd bought all her gifts and was looking forward to the holidays.
We would usually go to one of Jill's sisters for Christmas Day, which was always very nice. And that's what we were supposed to be doing on Christmas 1995.
Yate at the time would have been like any town of its kind. The Christmas decorations were up, the presents were around the family Christmas tree. Louise and her friends would have obviously been looking forward to a season of parties and celebration, going to nightclubs. She was aged 18, had a wide circle of friends. She was a typical teenager, having a good time and celebrating Christmas in the way young people celebrate Christmas now.
It was a very, very cold evening, Christmas Eve, And I took Louise to her friend's house, and then Jill and I went out with some friends from across the road up to Chipping Sodbury for a drink. And then we came home, then went to bed.
Meanwhile, Louise and her friends were partying in a local nightclub called Spirals, located in the main shopping centre, less than a mile from her home.
In the morning, I got up late, very late for me, and I was surprised to see that Louise's bedroom door was open. So I knocked on the door, peeped in, and she wasn't there, and there's no sign of her having been there.
As the town excitedly awoke on Christmas morning, Robert and Jill Smith began to realise something was wrong.
We phoned her friend Catherine's house and found that she hadn't been there.
We just sort of assumed that she might have stayed around at Cath's, although, you know, she never had before, but I suppose just trying to think of reasons other than bad thoughts.
And then we called the police that morning about 11 o'clock to report that she was missing. They took it very seriously immediately. They sent a police officer around. He interviewed us, and then he searched the house because he said that, strangely, very often missing people actually are at home. So he went into the loft as well. He had to confirm that she definitely wasn't there. We had an awful rest of the day. Christmas was cancelled almost straight away, so we didn't have any Christmas at all.
We had to phone my sister to say we weren't coming to Christmas dinner. Robert had to explain why.
We stayed up throughout the night, hoping that every car door we heard, every footstep we heard was Louise.
Well, that was the first day of the worst possible time of our life, really.
"24 hours later, Avon and Somerset police had actioned a full-scale missing persons inquiry. Leading the hunt was Chris Farrell.
The first place that you obviously send teams to gather the information whilst it's still fresh in people's memories is the nightclub. Then you try and encompass everybody that was out and about that night through various means, CCTV, for instance, and you gradually build up the picture.
The policeman came round and he said, could I go over to the shopping centre, which is where the nightclub was that Louise had been to that evening, to the office, because they had CCTV coverage of the door where Louise would have come out from the club. And so we went through this, and there she was coming out. And I forget exactly what time, quite late, about 1-ish, 1:30, something like that. But she was fine. She walked down the stairs, no trouble, she was fine. And she did talk to people in the car park. And then that was the last anyone really saw of her.
From there, Louise Smith had simply vanished. On a cold Christmas night, a short distance from home, something had happened to her. But nobody yet had any idea of the true horrors that had occurred. The small town of Yate sits just a few miles north of Bristol. It's a commuter town, and though it's once been host to tragedy, it's generally considered to be a safe and peaceful place to live.
There are a number of satellite towns in South Gloucestershire. Yate has probably grown more exponentially in the last 20 or 30 years. It's grown steadily because of its links to Bristol and Bath, in fact, and it's close to the motorway network, so that makes it quite an attractive place for people to live.
The town formed part of the patch for reporter Nigel Dando.
Yate is like most towns of its size, really. You wouldn't expect any major crimes to happen. It was just things like burglaries and theft. Nothing major, just the routine sort of crime that's been around for decades, if not centuries, really.
The heart of the new town was based around the shopping centre, and amongst the shopping centre was an entertainment venue called Spirals. And of course, like the local pubs, all the youngsters would go to places like that at Christmas.
One of those young people was Louise Smith, who on Christmas 1995 had gone to Spiral's nightclub with her friends. But she hadn't been seen after leaving the club at about 1 a.m. And very soon, Chris and his team had been alerted.
It was a routine call of a missing person, and when we set about trying to find out the likely places that she could have gone, it became apparent that it was totally out of character for her to just suddenly disappear.
I got the phone call on Boxing Day when I was having my lunch with my family, and I learnt of the basic circumstances that Louise had gone missing and that there was quite a lot of concern about her. You couldn't easily see an obvious explanation that was going to end well with the limited information that was available at that time.
Like all offences, somebody out there knows the answers, and it's incumbent upon the police officers to ask the right questions in the right places.
I think that we had a skeleton crew in the office, and the police were quite keen, in fact they were very keen, to establish Louise's whereabouts. So on the Boxing Day, the newspaper was full of an appeal from the police to find Louise. You hope the best for the family and the people that she's close to, that it will have a happy ending, but given the fact that she didn't have a history of disappearing and the fact that Louise wasn't at home, made you, or made us as journalists, fear the worst.
With the appeals beginning to reach residents in Yate, detectives put together a timeline of exactly where Louise had been and who she'd been seen with.
It was a mammoth task with over 450 people in the nightclub, and we pretty much were able to work out probably about 98% of the people who were in attendance. But none of those people were able to take us any further forward than the fact that Louise left that nightclub, and she had been seen by friends heading off across the car park past a kebab van.
She would have taken about 8 minutes to walk home from there. So something obviously happened between where she was last seen and her home address.
You know, every parent's nightmare not to find your daughter in bed on a Christmas morning of all days.
It is a truly nightmarish time, it really is. The first thing I thought of was that she'd had an accident. There had been no reports from any hospitals or anywhere. And that's when you start thinking it's, even worse.
You could conceivably be looking at someone who's killed themselves, but it was apparent that she was a happy-go-lucky girl that was enjoying life, and quite evident that it was unlikely that anything like that had happened.
She had also bought tickets for New Year's Eve at the same club, a week later, obviously. You don't do that if you're planning not to be there.
No one had seen her. No one had seen her since 2 o'clock in the early hours of Christmas morning. And somebody with the circles of friends and family that she had, just to vanish was just so strange, so unusual.
The hours turned into days, and door-to-door inquiries along the route Louise would have walked failed to turn up any new leads. But they wondered, with it being the Christmas holidays, whether everyone was paying attention to the news. So the effort to reach residents was stepped up.
The police, the day after, I think it was December the 28th, they took the step of holding a public press conference.
At a police news conference, Louise's father made an emotional appeal for some sign that she's safe.
You find that you are in a situation which you're totally unprepared for. How could you be prepared for that sort of thing? I remember seeing people who had suffered in the same way on television being interviewed and thinking, well, they seem to be not too bad. And now I realise that they were in an awful state, but they were just able to hold it together to do the interviews. And that's how we've been. We all love her. We're missing her, and we want her back. There were posters up in Yate of Louise, so you would hear people talking and supporting us. And just, if we went over to the shopping centre, people would just, you know, politely, you know, sort of pat us on the back, as it were, and say, good luck, hope, you know. We knew that the town was, you know, sort of rooting for us, as it were.
But it wasn't just moral support that the town could offer.
This is probably the first time I've been back here in nearly a quarter of a century, and I do remember coming along here to Finch Road. There was really a feeling of trepidation in this, not only in this neighbourhood, but also right across the Chipping Sodbury area. I think one of the things with this community is that they all felt involved in some way. They felt the loss of Louise and they all wanted to do something about it. The decision was taken to mount this huge public search for her. It did involve thousands and thousands of people.
This afternoon, the great search continues. It's hoped it will yield some vital clues.
We had about 150 police officers to direct them. What would have taken us weeks took 4 hours.
They had buses, you know, hired buses coming into to Yate and Sodbury to search. And that was a great, it gives you a good feeling in it that people do care. Most people are on your side.
People came from Weston-super-Mare, you know, 30-odd miles away. People came from South Wales. And it was quite a sight to see all these people under the guidance of the police, just doing their bit, wanting to be helping in the inquiry in some way to try to solve the mystery of Louise's disappearance.
Unfortunately, of course, they didn't find her.
I think with the best will in the world, people were fearing the worst because there had been no trace of Louise just anywhere, and it was just as though she'd vanished into thin air.
We were worried that we weren't making progress. Obviously, Rob and Jill were frantic, clinging on to hope, and we were clearly very worried ourselves. But it was important to try to move forward, and absolutely critical to that investigation was to find Louise, because if we found her or her body, that would be the most likely opportunity to find the clues that might lead us to her murderer or the reason for her death.
After more than 6 weeks, the whole town of Yate was reluctantly moving on. There were no more lines of inquiry, no fresh avenues to explore. Some even feared that Louise's disappearance might never be explained. But then, police got a call.
2 teenage boys had found the remains of an individual in one of the quarries surrounding Sodbury.
It was a popular playground for young people at the time, and they were playing, I think they were sort of throwing balls or something like that, and one of the balls had gone into some undergrowth. So the boys went to follow the ball and get the ball back, and that was how the body had been found.
If you picture an open cast quarry where the road spirals down on the periphery, over the years that road collapses and leaves the odd shelf. The remains were about 15 feet down the slope.
That handbag's now being examined along with a number of other items believed to be Louise's personal possessions.
Forensic teams conducted a delicate operation to remove the stricken body from the quarry. A pathologist was even winched down to help, and then it was the formal task of identifying the victim.
You tend to know that it's probably the one that we're looking for, but you keep an open mind and go through the process of looking for yourself and making that decision.
Now, the police wouldn't confirm that it was Louise's body, but inevitably it just had to be.
It felt like a make or break moment because we absolutely needed something to take the investigation forward. This now created a whole new opportunity to look at a scene to understand what that environment, because all the tactics that we've deployed around where Louise had gone missing, we're now starting to apply to where her body was found and the forensics of the scene. So it was a major boost to the investigation, albeit really sad for Louise's parents, Rob and Jill, to find out actually that she had died.
There was a knock at the door, and there's a reporter there from South West News, and he said to me, he said, "You know, a body's been found." We hadn't heard anything at all. And I was just, you know, absolutely shocked. And almost at the same moment, the police arrived. They believed it was Louise. Who else could it be anyway? And I remember Jill sitting there and repeating over and over again, "It can't be our Lou." We were taken over there by the police to see the spot. It was high in the quarry with about something like a 200-foot drop down into the quarry bed, and her body had been well hidden behind a great big rock, as I remember it.
She hadn't fallen where she'd landed. It was a case of being placed there.
She'd been taken there deliberately to that particular place to hide her.
Louise Smith had been raped and murdered. Police were sure that there was no way she would have made her own way to the quarry on Christmas night or would have found her way to the precarious ledge. But whoever had killed her had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep her hidden. And they must have known about the quarry and its potential for keeping a secret. But who were they?
I think there was disbelief within the community that somebody could do that an innocent 18-year-old girl had been abducted and had ended up at that quarry in those dreadful circumstances, and that somebody had killed her and had just left her body there.
In a strange way, it was a relief, because what we had suspected and in our hearts knew had been confirmed. So we knew we wouldn't be spending the rest of our lives wondering what had happened to Louise. I know it sounds strange because it was an awful thing. At least we knew, rather than suspecting.
But now Robert wanted to know who had killed his daughter. And the people of Yate weren't going to give up until they had the answer. In 1995, police in the town of Yate were on a murder hunt. They'd been looking for Louise Smith, who'd gone missing on Christmas morning after walking home from a local nightclub. But 7 weeks later, her body had been found in a nearby quarry, and then they discovered that she'd been raped and murdered. They suspected her killer might be local, and in a small town that meant that Louise's family had to face up to realising that the killer might be amongst them.
I always had the thought that, yes, I might be passing by, I might be holding a door open for him. You know, that was a very disquieting thought, that he could be amongst us, close to us at any time. Really didn't have a clue as to who might have done it.
Detectives from Avon and Somerset Police began to put together a profile of the offender. They thought it was likely to be male, a high proportion of killers are. They presumed it was someone physically fit, and they believed it was someone with local knowledge. But none of these details could identify who it was. They needed more evidence, and they hoped that science could come to the rescue. Although DNA technology was fairly new, scientists thought that they could extract the DNA of the killer from samples left on Louise's body.
It's always a very difficult thing to take samples from a post-mortem and get a result DNA-wise. 99.9% of us are the same. 0.1% is different. The scientists will be looking at what I will understand as a thousandth of that 0.1%. So it's a very minute thing that they're dealing with, especially when the remains have been there for nearly 7 weeks. And the decomposition of anything out in the open makes it very difficult and, up to that time, impossible.
Nevertheless, scientists did attempt to get DNA samples from Louise's body, and they got a breakthrough.
It had been one of the coldest winters for many years, and over those 6 weeks the temperature had barely gone above freezing, and that in a sense was bode well around the preservation of Louise's body, because forensically it created opportunities that might otherwise have been lost to us.
The scientists obviously went beyond their energies and came up with something which pushed the boundaries. They got a profile from those samples.
So, despite the length of time since Louise's murder, her killer's DNA remained on her body, and scientists had found it. They were now one step closer to catching a killer.
And that's when hope really did spring in our hearts, because the thing we wanted above anything then was to find out who had done this. We want the person who raped and murdered Louise to be caught. That is everything to us.
DNA was still in its relative infancy. I mean, there was no massive data bank of DNA samples around the country that the police could go to match the DNA that they'd found on Louise's body. So the police didn't have a lot to go on.
Every male in the area was a suspect, but now police had a means of ruling people out. They planned to test everyone, taking their DNA to compare to the sample they had recovered, hoping to find a match.
The community had been outraged by the events, and the discovery of Louise's body meant that there was a huge community spirit. We had no legal ability to get a swab, and almost everyone without question that we asked to give a swab was absolutely willing to give it.
But it was a process that could take years, and the first time anywhere in the UK that mass DNA screening had been used to try to find a killer. So Chris and his team made a list to prioritise the order in which people would be tested. Top of the list were known sex offenders who had been in the nightclub. People living on the route, people that knew Louise, and people with a history of violence were placed high. And then the team began working their way down the list, one by one, day after day.
We had been working on the inquiry for a really long time now, probably over a year, and I think we'd swabbed about 3,000 people and we hadn't found anyone. And we started to widen the parameters, and one of the parameters we widened was walking through the car park.
Police had previously only focused on finding and testing the men seen in the car park around the time Louise had been walking through it. But now they opened up the search to any men in the car park that night.
And that brought in a young man called David Frost, who had walked through the car park at about 3 o'clock in the morning. It's one of hundreds of people, and quite a low priority compared to some of the other people.
David Frost was a civil engineering student at the University of Surrey in Guildford. He was, from all accounts, quite an intense student, a successful student. He had been captured on CCTV outside the nightclub on the night in question. He'd been drunk, he hadn't been allowed in because of his behaviour.
Because he was of low priority and no aggravating features, we just asked if he would be willing to give a swab, and he said that he would be willing, and that within a few weeks he would be coming back to his home address in Yate.
But between the time of agreeing to give the sample and the time it came to give it, he'd actually got a work placement in South Africa with an engineering firm. So he wasn't around when the police came calling.
This was quite puzzling because he'd not said he was going to South Africa. He'd said he'd come in and give a swab. He hadn't turned up and he'd left the country. And so suddenly he was coming significantly up the list of people that we were interested in.
Now police wanted to get that sample they'd been promised, so they got in touch with their colleagues in South Africa to see if they could help.
The South African police could not believe that we had spent, with about 50 or 60 police officers, 18 months searching for the murder of one person.
A murder is a murder. It's a serious crime and you have to deal with it, given your own circumstances.
The South Africans agreed to help and set to work.
And the South African police saw him in his civil engineering placement and took the swab and sent it back to us.
The sample went off to be analysed and it came back with the probability of it being somebody else, only 1 in 35 million.
So David Frost was apparently the killer. His DNA matched the sample taken off the victim. Remarkably, he'd given his own DNA sample and linked himself to the crime.
We were really rubbing our hands at that stage, but there was a problem because he was still in South Africa.
The only way that we could do anything was to actually go out to South Africa to try and talk to him. We had no legal authority in South Africa. We had no extradition treaty.
Myself and a couple of other lads went out to liaise with the police out there. And my remit was to treat any suspect the same way as I would if they were in the UK. On the day that we met him, the engineering firm had a solicitor there who the South African police said is an expert in extradition. So I said, what's likely to happen then when he gets hold of it? And they said, you probably never get him back.
When David Frost came into the room, we told him that we were British police officers. We didn't have any authority, he wasn't under arrest, but we had strong evidence to believe that he was responsible for the death of Louise and that we wanted to talk to him about coming back to England with us.
We had no friends there and he only had 3 months of his work visa left. Very little money, what would he do? So I phoned Bristol and spoke to the duty solicitor. And he eventually talked him into accompanying us back to the UK. So we bought the tickets and said to him that we would meet him in 2 days' time at Johannesburg Airport. And my team couldn't believe that we were there in the same room as him and we were letting him go, but we had no jurisdiction there. We knew he had a girlfriend over there at the time, and he went off with the girlfriend.
We were deeply troubled and worried about the whole situation. We knew that he had killed Louise. We didn't know who his girlfriend was. We didn't know where he was living. We were frightened that he might harm this new girlfriend. We were frightened that he might harm himself.
We didn't really expect to see him again.
Chris had just watched David Frost squirm from his grasp. The man he believed had killed Louise Smith was at liberty in South Africa. They faced an anxious 48-hour wait to see if he'd join detectives at the airport.
We got to the airport 2 days hence and he turned up.
Lo and behold, he pulled up in a car with his girlfriend and he said goodbye to her and walked over to us and got into our car. It was, amazing that he just decided to do that, really.
Chris finally had David Frost on his way back to Britain.
I sat next to him on the flight. I think we knew he had done it. I've long thought what on earth convinced him to come back with us, but clearly we were pleased that he did.
Well, we waited till he was actually standing on UK terra firma and arrested him. Took him to the nearest police station. Then our time starts.
It was remarkable to realise that he was a pleasant, intelligent, articulate young man.
He didn't give the impression of a nasty killer, if you like. I dealt with some nasty killers and he didn't come in that category. He looked like a student, he acted like a student, but very quiet and reserved. And in a way, you had some sort of feelings for him in that position.
So with Frost not giving the appearance of a killer and drawing sympathy from detectives, some began to wonder if they got the right man. But detectives were basing their suspicions on the DNA evidence, and that wasn't all they had.
The evidence by now was starting to build against him. He initially said that he'd seen Louise and that was all, but bit by bit, over a series of interviews, he said, look, I want to tell you the truth now. And his version of the truth was that they'd had sex on the quarry, that Louise had started to scream and had panicked about what had happened, that she refused to quieten down, and that he, in a panic, had put his hand over her mouth, and the next thing he knew that she was dead. But he was adamant that he hadn't meant to kill her, that it was a case of manslaughter, but he agreed that he'd left her body at the quarry and had made a run for it. From the public's point of view, it became clear again quite quickly that the police had got their man, but that their man was a member of the community that they lived in. So there was a sense of relief that this wasn't going to be a serial killer who was on the loose, because I think that was the fear at the time, that whoever had done this might strike again. But nevertheless, still horror that someone who had done this was a member of their community who was living amongst them.
David Frost was now admitting that he was responsible, but denying he'd intended to kill Louise. It would be down to a jury to decide his fate. Police in Avon and Somerset had spent a year tracking the killer of Louise Smith, and it was a search that had taken them all the way to South Africa. Their man was David Frost, a local student whose DNA matched the sample taken from the victim, and a man who had fled the country a short while later. Now he was back in the UK, admitting he was responsible, but denying the murder.
On the day of the trial, Louise's family were in court, some of her friends were in court. The court was packed.
He looked so ordinary. In fact, one of the police officers said, Gary Davies said that if your daughter had said she was going out with this chap, you wouldn't have felt any qualms about it. And it just left me cold, I think.
We assumed that David Frost was going to plead guilty to manslaughter, but that he was going to deny murder. And when David Frost appeared in the dock and the count of murder was put to him, he stood up and pleaded guilty. Now, while in a way that would have brought some sense of closure to Louise's family and friends, there were all these question marks that were left hanging in the air. And I think that to this day, we still don't know the precise circumstances of what had driven David Frost to do what he did to Louise.
We felt sort of robbed in a way. He got himself out of having to go through all that in court, having all that he'd done made public. And at the same time, the rape charge was dropped, or left on file, as they say, which we felt cheated by as well.
Absolutely disgraceful. Where they found her was just feet away from a sheer drop into the quarry. So he must have gone back in the morning or something, because there's no way he could have hidden my Lou at night without falling over the edge. Sorry.
It could have been any girl that he took a fancy to. He didn't know Louise. She just happened to be there. Louise's life was worth 14 years of his time. But Louise's life would have probably gone on for another 70 plus years. Easily. Not to mention the children that she might have had. It just left us disgusted, really.
He should have served Well, he should never come out, really. Life should be life. Why should he have a life when my Louise hasn't got one?
He was given the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment, but he served just over 16. He's a free person now.
I don't know where he is. He's not allowed back here, not to Yate. We take flowers to Louise's grave at the church every week. And each time I see the headstone with Louise's name on it, it's like I'm seeing it for the first time. There's a sinking feeling in my stomach every time. Christmas is just one of those things to get through now.
We had so much support from people, but at the same time, it didn't take away what he did to her.
This was a devastating crime for the whole town. You know, people were angry with what had happened, the fact they had lost one of their own, an innocent girl from a nice family, and you could see that passion and commitment by the thousands of people that came out to help search for her, the willingness of thousands of people to give the police a DNA swab, to free up police time to move on to find her actual killer.
And for over a year, the community of Yate wondered who was responsible. It took a revolutionary police approach to weed out their suspect, mass screening the entire town for DNA. Finding the killer was one of their own, a local man, was enough of a shock. But learning of his release 16 years later only added to their anger. For the people of Yate, Bristol, and across the UK, they hope that there are no more David Frosts lurking and waiting for a time to strike.